On my channel, I've covered many rise and falls of different sports, rollerblading, even extreme pogo, but then there's one sport that has managed to stand the test of time, and that is the WWE. With 91 million subscribers on YouTube, over 30 related video game titles, and a franchise net worth of approximately 5.63 billion. This sport of grown men in superhero costumes slipping around wrestling on the floor, competing in staged fights with dramatic plot lines, has built a die-hard cult audience that has kept this sport relevant for roughly 70 years. However, all this success has not come without its controversies.
We're losing sight of the fact that steroids were legal at the time. I mean, it was just as legal.
Not in some states they were, and they were not.
New allegations have emerged involving WWE billionaire CEO Vince McMahon.
Well, the wrestling world in shock today. Former champion Chris Benoit found dead in his Atlanta home along with his wife and young son.
Alright, to start off with, we need to work out where WWE came from, this sport of fake staged wrestling. And it starts all the way back in the late 1800s with a legitimate sport called catch wrestling. But somewhere down the line, things changed. You see, in the 1920s, catch wrestling become intertwined with like the carnival and the circus. You know, people would come from far and wide to see these two blokes slipping around like seals to see who would get the best of each other. But you see, on occasion, these champion wrestlers, they would win their fight and they would turn to the audience and yell, "Who dare fight me next?" A tense moment of silence would sweep across the audience. And then a little lad would raise his trembling hand and say, "Me." It's your classic David versus Goliath. The fight would start and everyone would suspect that the champion would win, but then somehow Little Man would topple him and the crowd would go crazy. But of course, Little Man was a trained plant. He wasn't a random circus goer as it appeared, but none of that mattered to the audience. The moment was so epic, this would become a story you would tell all your friends in the neighborhood for weeks to come, which ultimately would boost sales and hype for future events. This was the start of the worked era. And from here, wrestling kind of adopted the mantra of don't let the truth get in the way of a good story. Match fixing became an integral part of the sport. The winners of these fights were decided prior to the match. Wrestlers would adopt these gimmicks, these characters, and these costumes. You might have Larry the Bold, who would pull up in a three-piece suit whilst having a spanner through his head. And the promoters of wrestling would lean into these characters and create like plots and storylines that would continue across multiple fights. And very quickly, what was once a very legitimate, prestigious sport was now theatre. And so you might be there wondering, was there not a single person in the room who went, hang on a second, I think this is fake? Around this era, major newspapers and journalists would point out how wrestling was now fake and it was all rigged. And the people would read this, but basically, no one cared. They simply just enjoyed the show. And so, with that, the foundations were in place. Wrestling was about to take over.
Jake the Snake Roberts versus the $1 Million Man, Ted DiBiase. Yeah. DiBiase lands $1 million punch.
So the way that the wrestling industry worked in the early to mid 1900s was basically, it was kind of like Game of Thrones. All across the USA, there would be different territories and they were owned by different companies who were owned by different people. But you see, there would be one ruthlessly ambitious man who had his eyes on the Iron Throne. Before we go any further with this video, I want to shout out today's sponsor, Atlas VPN. Now, if you're a digital boy like me, you'll know that privacy on the internet is very hard to come by. But luckily, Atlas VPN is here to keep the internet accessible and secure for everyone. With more than 6 million users worldwide, Atlas VPN is the best VPN deal on the market. With its online protection coming in at $1.70 a month, plus 6 months extra with a 30-day money-back guarantee. With Atlas VPN, you can see shows on streaming services like Netflix that you can't see in your own country. On top of this, it keeps your Google searches private. As well, Atlas VPN goes above and beyond by stopping malware and ads. By blocking malicious links, ads, and trackers, and notifying you when someone's trying to steal your data. Atlas VPN can save you money shopping online. And what's even better is one subscription will cover you on unlimited devices. So be sure to get this Black Friday deal, because now you can get Atlas VPN Premium for just $1.70 a month, plus 6 months extra with a 30-day money-back guarantee. It's the best Atlas VPN offer of the year. So be sure to get your deal by clicking the link in the video description below. It's a limited limited time offer. Anyway, back to the video.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to All American Wrestling and a Happy New Year to you all. This is Vince McMahon reporting.
In 1982, Vince McMahon purchased what was previously known as the WWF off of his father, Vincent J. McMahon, with an entirely new attitude to how wrestling should be run. Vince McMahon was hell-bent on taking over the entire wrestling industry, but you see, there was a problem. The current rulers of Westeros, I mean wrestling, was known as the NWA. At this time, if you wanted to succeed in wrestling, you had to basically bow to the NWA. And they were doing an okay job. Wrestling was pretty big prior to the 80s, with wrestlers like Andre the Giant, Bruno Sammartino, and superstar Billy Graham. But as big as these names were and wrestling was becoming, it was being held back. And no one could have predicted what was about to happen. As the torches passed on to Vince K. McMahon, he was readying his army to take over the world of wrestling. Vince has a famous quote of how he described wrestling prior to WWE, in which he says, "In the old days, there were wrestling fiefdoms all over the country, each with its own little lord in charge. Each little lord respected the rights of his neighboring little lord. No takeovers or raids were allowed. There were maybe 30 of these tiny kingdoms in the US, and if I hadn't bought out my dad, there would still be 30 of them. I, of course, had no allegiance to those little lords." Vince McMahon and the WWF would usher in what would be known as the Golden Era. Quickly, McMahon and the WWF had completely taken over New York City and LA, the two largest media markets in America. And he started to target smaller territories by taking their wrestlers and basically strong-arming them out the competition. With the introduction of cable television and pay-per-view events, WWF's brand was very quickly dominating and giving these wrestlers major publicity. Vince was just picking off territories one at a time. He was basically playing a big board game of Risk and pretty much annihilating the competition. And as ruthless as Vince was, this was very good for the sport. He had torn down the old guard of wrestling who had become lazy and non-competitive. The WWF was here to shake it up.
The recognized symbol of excellence in sports entertainment.
But you see, for the WWF to really rule the Iron Throne and take over mainstream culture, they would need a superstar.
Champion of the world, Hulk Hogan.
I want to live forever, brother. I'm not worried spiritually about this thing. I got my
Hulk Hogan became a sensation. It's hard to put into words how big of a star he was. With this era of wrestling being called Hulkmania, the world adored him in the ring and outside of the ring. He was constantly popping up in mainstream culture.
from behind.
He was featured on the cover of the Sports Illustrated TV guide. He even had his own Saturday morning cartoon called Hulk Hogan's Rock and Wrestling. And this was another part of the WWF's success, was the connection between rock and wrestling. By utilizing the pop star Cyndi Lauper, WWF was able to intertwine itself into the world of rock music, with fights being broadcast on MTV, which was a show very popular amongst the young generation. The WWF became cemented in mainstream culture. It was now cool. And some major superstars would appear in the WWF, people like Mr. T, Muhammad Ali, of course Hulk Hogan and Cyndi Lauper. As WWF was ascending to the heights, all of the competition around it was crumbling. But you see, all this success and momentum could only last so long.
Even the game's biggest name has been tarnished.
He took steroids like he drank water.
Hulkamania is the largest arms in the world.
Now it was the 90s. After countless drug scandal arrests, the championing of the wrestler Sergeant Slaughter, who was a very outspoken supporter of Saddam Hussein, who for some reason they let him win the WWF title. And the death of Nancy Argentino, who is alleged, maybe, perhaps, to have been killed by a wrestler. And so, in a bid for damage control, Vince McMahon appeared on a show called Donahue, where he was debated over a controversy surrounding some pretty bad allegations.
A lot of men saying that there's a good deal of gay abuse underway in the world of wrestling.
These allegations were very serious, but the studio audience was laughing.
A number of people to say, because I wouldn't have with another guy in the game, I couldn't get promoted. Honestly, some Well, listen, while you're laughing, this has been a not-so-funny issue for women.
And that is largely because the WWF and wrestling wasn't seen as serious. In the public's eye, everything to do with the WWF was a plot. It was all meta. It was like storyline. And so these allegations were kind of just laughed off, which was pretty good news for Vince McMahon.
I think that it's a shame that 6 of the people on the panel, with the exception of Mr. Meltzer, are sitting there accusing Mr. McMahon, who so far has done nothing wrong. Mr. Oh, I know you've been in jail. Mr. San Martino, your son was fired under very suspicious circumstances. How can you sit here?
But regardless, all of the massive hype of the 80s was really starting to dry out towards the early to mid 90s. Vince McMahon himself was taken to court over the drug scandal and somehow managed to not get done for it, despite one of the doctors who worked for the WWF being convicted and sent to jail for illegally distributing steroids. As well, Vince had successfully been sued by the wrestler Jesse Ventura for $800,000 over royalties. So all of this drama was getting out of hand, and it led to sponsors pulling out of the WWF. The WWF's image was being dragged through the dirt, and the success was very quickly slowing down.
Hulkster wraps up The Undertaker. Can he keep him down? Yes!
And in this time, a rival had emerged in a company called WCW, who were basically doing the Uno reversal on Vince by taking wrestlers from the WWF and bringing them over to WCW. And the WWF tried their best to combat this in a series of like parody sketches.
This is where the big boys play. Yeah.
I like that.
As opposed to trying to improve their television show that viewers had now become bored of. And so if the WWF was to come out of this, it would need to do something dramatic. And then one day, Vince McMahon had a eureka moment.
I believe Stone Cold Steve Austin has just arrived. I can only imagine how he's going to react when he hears the news of Vince McMahon's shocking announcements earlier on tonight.
This chaotic public image that Vince McMahon and the WWF had around it in this time could actually be something good, leading us to the Attitude Era.
No, he didn't make that
announcement. Where's the dumb bastard at?
Are you talking about Mr. McMahon?
You're damn right I'm talking about Vince. Where the summit at?
As the name suggests, the Attitude Era had a new attitude. It was edgy, it was dark, it was countercultural. You had the wrestler Stone Cold Steve Austin, who was known for having run-ins with the banned boxer Mike Tyson.
I don't know how good your hearing is, but if you don't understand what I'm saying, I always got a little bit of sign language, so here's to you.
WWF was throwing away its family-friendly image and going down this edgier route, leading Vince to having this ingenious idea of putting himself into the storyline.
There can only be one opponent for Steve Austin, and that is Mr. Vince McMahon.
What? He and Stone Cold Steve Austin would have this beef that was played out publicly, with the anticipation and hype being built around the idea that Vince was going to fight Stone Cold Steve Austin. Ultimately, nothing materialized. They never had a fight, but the hype around this moment gave WWF its first ratings win over the WCW in 22 months. And this was pretty smart. Like, Vince knew who he was. He was a ruthless, cold businessman. And he didn't make any bones about that. He presented himself to the world as that, and he was this villain.
There, the owner of the WWF.
I promise you, I'm not gonna hit you.
With these new wrestlers like Mick Foley, The Rock, and Stone Cold Steve Austin, the WWF was now cool again. The late 90s to the early 2000s saw a second meteoric rise of the WWF. The WWF rebranded now to the WWE, that's what it's known as today. The wrestlers that spearheaded this era went on to be superstars. Like, I remember myself having toys of The Rock, and I was like fighting him and Steve Austin in my bedroom. Their theme tunes, their catchphrases had just taken over mainstream culture. And the merchandising was crazy. There was toys, magazines, and video games. WWE SmackDown had become a weekly television show. WWE had become listed on Wall Street. And the small threat of WCW quickly came crumbling down. And the WWF would feed on its corpse by taking all the last wrestlers. From here, wrestling in the WWF was bigger than ever. More and more superstars would be born. People like John Cena, Brock Lesnar, Batista. I don't know what it is about Vince McMahon and the WWE, but they have this ability to spot out superstar talent, who many of them would end up in TV and films that would only boost the success of WWE with its celebrities. However, as things were going so well, disaster would strike.
A shocking find at a downtown Minneapolis hotel.
The
body of World Wrestling Entertainment star Eddie Guerrero. And Ellen Gallows is live at Target Center. What are the fans saying?
The iconic wrestler Eddie Guerrero would suffer from a heart attack and ultimately die. This was a major hit to the WWE, and in this same time there was tons of drug scandals. All of this eventually compounding and leading to the Chris Benoit double murder-suicide.
Shocked today, former champion Chris Benoit found dead in his Atlanta home along with his wife and young son. Police now treating the discovery as a double murder-suicide.
Which was said to be fueled by steroids. This horrific event was a major hit to the WWE. They had to clamp down on all their regulations of the sport. Into the 2010s, the WWE was still massive. It was still the king of the genre. However, the fans of the WWE started to grow a little bit despondent with some of the storytelling in the sport. The young, ambitious Vince McMahon had kind of grown lazy as he sat on the Iron Throne. His creativity, his ambition was fading. And so the 2010s was getting a little stagnant, leading to record low viewership in 2020. And then on June 15th, 2022, headlines would report that Vince McMahon was being internally investigated for paying a lady $3 million in hush money who it was alleged he was having an affair with. And more of these stories would come out. Eventually it turned out he paid $12 million to 4 different women as hush money. And so there was little else the king of the WWE could do, leading to July 22nd, 2022, where Vince McMahon would step back from the WWE and retire. This was a weird moment for the sport. This showman and entertainer didn't go out with a big bang, he just left with a tweet. Vince McMahon undeniably was an incredible businessman. He changed the world of wrestling and you have to give him his due. What he and the WWE did was incredible. They created this cultural phenomena, generated a ton of money, made a ton of superstars and employed tons of people and made a sport that people love to watch. However, his many questionable business practices, the personal allegations and the fact that tons of wrestlers came out talking against him, the king of WWE would quietly slip off into obscurity.
You're fired.
And so with the decline of Vince McMahon, the WWE right now in 2022 is in a really weird place. Because you see, overall popularity in WWE is dropping considerably. There's low ticket sales, low merch sales, low Google search results. But when the fans are polled, they kind of say they're just bored of how cartoonish and kind of boring the storylines of the sport have become. But despite all of that, WWE is making more money now than ever, due to some very clever business deals. They have a deal with Fox, they have this streaming deal with Peacock, and as well their deal with the Saudi royal family that's earned them $350 million. The WWE, despite its downward trajectory in popularity in 2020, 2021 and 2022, were record high financial years for the WWE. On April 2nd, 2021, the first time I'd heard about WWE and just mainstream culture happened with the signing of Logan Paul.
So I just signed my WWE contract with the support of Triple H and Steph McMahon.
I'm gonna guess this was done with response to popularity dropping and trying to target the sort of Gen Z audience that Logan Paul has. And this was a pretty big moment, and from what I understand, it's been fairly successful. As well, their YouTube channel is one of the highest viewed channels on YouTube and one of the highest subscribed. So I can't really see the success of the WWE going anywhere anytime soon. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel and watch this video right here.